Welcome, everybody. I'm Jason Yee. This is Train 2.0, and I'm from Vancouver, BC. And how are you guys doing today? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. Now, this is a webinar presentation on how to skate like McDavid, part 97, as I've indicated, because I've had a few parts to it. And if you're watching a replay, skip ahead a couple minutes here because I'm just going to wait for people to get on here live and make sure everything is going. So I'm going to say hello to everyone who's watching live right now, checking on the chat, checking on the stream. Pretty sure everything's good. Give everyone a couple minutes to get on, and then we'll get going. All right, let's get started. So we are going into we're going to talk about how to skate like McDavid. And like I said, this is part number 97. Like I said, there's been a few parts. And I guess my first one, my very first McDavid video was the McDavid Drive Wide Guide. You've probably seen that. And this is more of a full presentation. It's going to involve some more detail. It's going to involve some more science, some kinesiology. And I'm really going to do my best to explain to you some of the principles behind his skating mechanics and the downhill skating system. So what you'll learn today is the 6 magic mechanic principles behind the downhill skating system. And so part of that means learning how to use your whole body to generate power, not just your legs. The magical lever for ice pressure. How to reduce tension and therefore increase efficiency. And then the current motor learning science behind these mechanics. So by the end, I'm going to explain to you how you can begin learning the downhill skating system to skate like McDavid. Now, I like to make sure that I'm not wasting anyone's time. My goal is to help hockey players get from where they are to where they want to go. We call this the straight path. So I don't want to waste anyone's time who this presentation is not for. So if you're interested in power skating or you're like a big gung-ho power skating person, this presentation is not for you. I'm going to go against what most power skating advice is because I've studied the mechanics of the NHLers directly. I have a different approach that I took. And I'm going to basically say a whole bunch of things that are opposite from power skating advice. So I don't want to waste your time if you're looking for like a typical power skating presentation. And I also like to say this might come off a little off the cuff, but this presentation is not for people who don't believe in science. And I've joked at times about different things like McDavid is hypnotizing the NHL, he's a magician, Datsuk possesses magical powers. But the truth is that McDavid's human. You know, these excellent elite skaters that we see today like McKinnon, Barzal, Matthews, Rasmus Dahlin, they're all human. And they obey the same mechanical laws that you and I do, meaning that we can learn from their mechanics and then, apply it ourselves. And there are some people who like to comment and just say, no, this isn't possible to teach this stuff and blah, 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 ignoring some very basic parts of science like, the laws of deliberate practice, leverage, the stretch shortening cycle, which we'll get into. So if you're not into science, this presentation isn't for you. Now, I'd like to address a couple important parts because I'm going to talk about Connor McDavid's skating stride. And one thing I am not is I am not Connor McDavid, and I didn't teach him how to skate. I'm fully aware of that. And that makes me nowhere near qualified to teach you how to skate like Connor McDavid. But I would like to share with you who I am. And my name is Jason Yee. I'm a professional hockey player. I am a kinesiologist. I went to the University of British Columbia, which is one of the top 35 schools in the world. and did my undergrad degree there. And I'm the founder of Train 2.0, and I've helped thousands of players around the world. Now, the system that we use here at Train 2.0 is we study the magic mechanics of the pros, and then we teach it to players, and then we get their feedback to make the instructions simpler, more trusted, and measurable, so that hardworking players, they get out what they put in. I see problems with systems everywhere: power skating, stick handling, all sorts of stuff where players put in hard work but don't get out results. That's a problem, and that's what we're aiming to solve here with Train 2.0. And for those of you who are on, say hi, let me know who's on. Glad you can watch us today. Now, I want to address, of course, the idea of other systems. We all know that McDavid is a well-known proponent of a system where you skate around plastic obstacles, and I want to just address that quickly because a lot of people like to point out that he exclusively trained or supposedly exclusively trained with this method, and this may have led to his mechanics. And I agree that this is possible. And so I want to talk about the difference between obstacles versus mechanics. And a question that we should all ask, and I don't know the answer, is, do obstacles always force mechanics? Just because you have to skate around an obstacle or put a puck through an obstacle doesn't mean that you have to use specific mechanics. It might, right? I don't really know the answer. I think I've seen players use cones and plastic obstacles and training devices with the wrong mechanics, and I've seen them use it with the right mechanics. There's probably a chance that these obstacles and training aids likely force or encourage the right mechanics, but they don't force the right mechanics. So that leaves a hole in some of these systems because if you're using the system but maybe not getting the mechanics right, you might be getting repetitions again and again and again with the wrong mechanics, but even though you're using this training aid or these obstacles to go around. So I just want to point that out so that you can ask that question about your own training. And the approach that I take is a mechanical approach. I think that obstacles and equipment and training aids are a great tool. I like the Pavel Barber approach, and his idea is that a training aid, if it causes you to be engaged and get out and practice more and have more fun, then it's a good thing. So he's kind of a little less concerned about the method. Does it strictly force certain mechanics, and does it? And he's interested in, does it excite players, and does it engage them? Is it fun? Does it encourage more practice? And I think that's a really good way to look at training obstacles and other systems. And so when we're saying, prove for mechanics, this system forces this mechanics, it isn't a one variable world. We can all agree that it's not a one variable world where one system causes one player to do one thing. That's probably something we can agree on. So do skating around obstacles with certain technique and footwork help? Maybe. Do they force it? I'm not sure. But my approach is to study the mechanics, break them down scientifically, teach them to players, and help players that way. So I'm not discounting anything. I'm just saying that is the approach we're taking here. Now, let's get into the downhill skating system. So what is skating downhill? As you can see here in this presentation or slide thing, McDavid is evidently skating downhill on the very flat ice. So what I mean by this is we're going to combine three factors to skate downhill. The first one is center of mass placement. The second is blade pressure and foot position. And then the third is bounce and full body power. So these three forces are going to come together to really maximize the skater's potential and it really feels like you're skating downhill. So let's get into that. Let's talk about the full body power part first, and we're going to talk about the inner spring. What we see a lot of power skating instructors teach, and a lot of skating instructors in general, is like and I think also just like I think maybe goaltending coaches, strength and conditioning coaches, they get into this idea of core stability. And what they do is they attempt to have players hold the core very still and stable, and then have the limbs move kind of half and half, one side and the other. But the thing is that the shoulders are attached to the rib cage. And what's between the shoulders and the rib cage, you ask, aside from the spine, is a bunch of muscles, right, that are elastic in nature. So ah, sorry about that. I'm not sure what happened. Hopefully we're good now. Oh, we're back. Sorry about that issue. Uh, just making sure that our stream is back online. Okay, we're back. Good. Apologies for that. Not sure quite what happened. But anyhow, let's go back to the inner spring. The idea that most coaches, I think, seem to be caught in the core stability craze, which is to treat your body as you have your core, and then your legs and generate power off of that. And they literally say, like, separate the body in two, and then in quarters. So cut your upper body off from your lower body, and cut your body in half symmetrically. That's a huge mistake because the shoulders generate power through the hips into the legs, and then the legs in return generate power into the hips, which generate through the core to the rib cage. So the inner spring is the ability to have your rib cage rotating over top of your pelvis, and this causes a springiness which your body can use to transmit force into the ground. I'm double checking that this is all good. It seems like it's all good. If you have any questions while I'm chatting, or if there's any issues, let me know. So that is that. So the downhill skating system uses the inner spring to stride, and we'll see that with McDavid. Whereas power skating uses no inner spring. In fact, makes it much harder to generate power. So it's all in the hips. I said this in the cane stick handling course as well. And what we're seeing is the hip swivel, which is goes along with the shoulder twist, because the shoulder twist generates the initial movement, which transmits force through the inner spring, which causes a hip swivel. And this generates both power, deception, and thirdly, the ability to change direction, which people call agility at ease. And so what I mean by this is with McDavid and the downhill skating system, you'll always have one hip forward, one hip in front of the other. This means that you can have more power because the hips actually twist to generate power instead of push. You have more deception because the hip swivel acts as a mini deke. You can deke left or right just by swiveling your hips. And then thirdly, because your hips are swiveled one way or the other at the time, you can always change directions very, very quickly. You can go left or right because you don't actually have to push and generate a bunch of tension. You just need to twist your hips, which requires much less tension. And if you remember last week's presentation on how to stick handle a cane, I talked about the proximal to distal gradient, which means that you want to, if you can, generate as much movement, not a large amount of movement, but generate the movement from close to your body and then have it translate out. We call this the whip effect. And then when you have the hip swivel dialed in, not only do you have the power, which comes from the inner spring, and the deception, which comes from being able to use the hips as dekes, and the change of direction, which comes from always having one hip swiveled forward, but you can use these skating movements to transfer to a game, right? The hip scissor, the soft hip, and the corkscrew are all mechanics that we see McDavid use all the time in his just normal without the puck skating, but he's able to use immediately with the puck as well. And we'll talk a bit more about why that works so well. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about, now that we've understood a little bit about the inner spring and how we can actually increase our force, get more force through our legs by attaching the upper and lower body and having them spring off each other instead of holding it still. Now we want to talk about ice pressure. And I said not a rocketed push, but that's meant to be not a rocketed push. What a lot of power skating coaches teach is a rocketed push, heel to toe, so pushing from the heel to toe. And that makes sense because in a lot of sports, you push off the toe. When you're running, you push off the toe, blah, blah, blah. And if you actually look at skating strides, it looks like you're pushing off the toe. But let me just give you another perspective you could take, another filter you could take, where instead of pushing, you think of riding the rail. And by that, I mean, imagine a cart ripping along like a rail, and then all of a sudden, there's a tight turn, and the cart is just stuck to the rail, and bang, it goes around the tight turn. And that cart that's riding the rail, it gets centripetal force, right? It's pushing out away. So as you turn left, your body goes right, but the cart stays on the rail. When McDavid, Barzal, Rasmus Dahlin, these top-end new breed of skaters that are coming out, every stride isn't a push. It's actually where they're riding on a rail. So rather than going from heel to toe, they're going from toe to heel. So what that looks like when you're riding a rail is just kind of doing those like inside edge C cuts, one foot then the other. I can actually, maybe I can bring it up here for you guys. That Crosby drill, just Googling it, Crosby edge work. There, take a look. This one, love this one. Oh no. Here, everyone can have a nice view of Home Depot. This simple drill. You can see I watch this one quite often. Very, very simple drill, riding a rail. We've all seen this drill. We've all done it in all sorts of different skating scenarios. And, oh, hello everyone. Right in your face. Let's get this slide presentation back up here. So that really simple drill is the idea of riding the rail. And what happens in terms of the blade pressure is it actually your blade lands flat, and then you deliver heel pressure, and then you have like the illusion of toe off, because the toe is more or less the last thing that leaves the ice. And yeah, it's going to impart a bit of force into the ground, but the main part of force, or the main force impulse, comes through the heel, or at least it feels that way. And then the toe off is mostly an illusion. But again, we often, coaches and power skating instructors, see this, and it's pretty reasonable to say, yes, you push off the toe because you see the toe be the last thing off the ice. But that's not what happens with the downhill skating system and the McDavids, the Barzals, the Dahlins, the Matthews. And part of the reason for this riding the rail analogy and going from the flat part of the blade and pushing through the heel is, as you can see in the slide, you can see how McDavid is leaned over. Okay, so you have his, I'm not sure if I can, there we go. You guys will be able to see, you have his center of mass is probably around here. We call this the center of mass. But here's where his blade is, right? And what happens is this creates the riding on a rail idea, where he's kind of taking that C cut, and because his weight is here, he ends up, guess what, falling, right? So we can see that here. How do I get rid of this? You can see that up top here. And this is from a study in kinesiology, where they look at where the center of mass is relative to like walking, so the phase of the gait. So when you're walking, people don't really think about walking, but what's happening is every time you're stepping when you're walking, it's a controlled fall. You move your center of gravity forward, and then your leg kind of plays catch up and steps in front of you and catches the fall, and then you fall again. So what you're always doing is, I don't know if you can see this thing here, but this is where your foot is. this is where your center of mass is, and you can see it goes from behind to directly over top where it's perfectly balanced, and then it falls forward, and then the next foot steps down, and then you have your center of mass move forward again, and then it goes forward again and all the way through, and it falls. So it's fall, 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 fall. That's how you walk. That's how you run. That's how speed skaters skate, and that's how McDavid skates. That's how Barzal skates. That's how Rasmus Dahlin skates every time they're striding. So where most players are pushing hard, they're just falling. It's really that simple. Their legs are just kind of uncoiling while they're putting their feet and body in a position to fall, and that generates their movement. So when you're riding on a rail with your edge, all you have to do is lean and fall, and that's going to create movement and power for you. So let me know if this is making sense, those who are watching, if you have any questions. Now let's talk about bounce, because this all fits in, this all combines together. And again, I told you this is going to be a science-heavy presentation. When we talk about bounce, this is why riding the rail and leaning to fall and using the inner spring is really important, more so than just pushing. When I refer to bounce, what I refer to is something scientifically known as the stretch shortening cycle. And what happens is that when a muscle is stretched, it reflexively contracts. So if you're just like, sitting here or whatever you're doing, kind of sit up and just rotate your shoulders back and forth. And notice that there's a springiness to that. When the muscles get stretched all the way, they want to spring back. So there's two things that happen when a muscle gets stretched. First off, there's the elastic energy of the muscles, where the muscles have this tissue, this springy tissue that springs it back into place. And then second, there's also what's called a stretch shortening cycle, which is actually a reflex, which is within the spinal cord. So if you get tapped on the knee at the doctor's and your reflexes go, that whole muscular contraction only occurs in the spinal cord. The information for whether to contract your muscle or not stays in your spinal cord. It doesn't even really go up to your brain. Your brain doesn't fire those muscles. Your spinal cord does. It's a reflex. That's kind of the idea of the term reflex. So when players like McDavid, Dahlin, Barzal, these elite younger players are skating, they don't use muscular tension. Okay, muscular tension is a very different thing. Like take your hand and consciously contract it, close it with a whole bunch of tension and open it. If you're doing that, that's this conscious contraction. You're using your brain, your motor cortex to fire the muscles in your hand, and you're going, okay, I'm gonna close and then open. But a reflex, or the stretch shortening cycle, is a reflex. So that's more like, I'm just gonna hold my hand here and then I'm gonna pull, and then notice how it bounces back, right? That's a reflex, and there's no conscious input from that. It's mostly all through your spinal cord. The information you guys can see on the slide here, the information comes from the muscle, goes to the spinal cord, and then it goes back right from the spinal cord to the muscle. And so that never travels upwards. So let's talk about why that's kind of important. I guess they're animal studies, but the brain, or the spinal cord actually, has a number of reflexes called the central pattern generator. And this means that most people can actually walk without much input from their brain, because it's just this collection of one reflex after another firing those muscles. Have you ever walked and kind of stumbled on something, like the top of your foot hit something? That's actually a reflex to be able to lift your foot up and over. So if you're walking along and then your toe hits something, your spinal cord automatically fires the right muscles to get your foot up and over. And that never travels upwards to the brain. So that's a subconscious movement that's occurring all through the spinal cord. And when that movement is occurring through the spinal cord, these reflexes, the nerve firing patterns are happening through the spinal cord, you have more capacity in your brain to focus on other things. So what I mean by that is when you're walking, right? It's mostly a subconscious movement pattern. You're using your central pattern generator, a whole bunch of reflexes in your spinal cord to fire your walking program. And then you end up having way more capacity up in your brain to observe and walk and have a conversation with people. So that's exactly what's happening with these skaters who are using bounce to skate really fast and well and balanced and agile, is that rather than using tension and pushing and consciously contracting their muscles, they are using the stretch shortening cycle. They are using the bounce of their muscles, the elasticity of their muscles. Therefore, it doesn't take a whole bunch of energy from your brain to direct those muscles because it's all this natural reflexive bouncing. So likely what's happening is they free up more capacity in their brain to process what's happening around them and to even go even faster. So that's why that matters. Now, I'll see if there's any questions. But that's mostly what I wanted to cover. And if you have any questions, let me know. I think the one thing I was about to touch on but didn't was the idea of, you hear this all the time with McDavid. They say he's faster with the puck than without. Well, it makes a ton of sense because when it comes to the inner spring, the puck can actually function as a part of that spring, right? It can actually cause it can cause force and rotation through your shoulders and rib cage, which can help power your hips. And I'm hoping that now you can see with the inner spring how the elasticity and the bounce makes it such a big difference. If you're able to use the inner spring to generate full body power, you can, like I said here, you can use the bounce. You can use the stretch shortening cycle, and this frees up capacity. You don't have to go into the brain as much to generate the power. It can be done more reflexively through your spinal cord. And so when you combine the bounce and the elasticity and the inner spring with the idea of ice pressure, with leaning and falling, you don't have to impart as much tension in the muscles, right? Because if instead of pushing with your muscles and creating a whole bunch of tension, you simply fall one way and you're able to keep your muscles loose and relaxed, you'll be able to use the elasticity, the stretch shortening cycle, the bounce of your muscles in order to generate speed, change direction, all those different things. So that's kind of the main parts of the presentation. So what I hope you got from this is a benefit of my thousands of hours staring at movement analyses as an undergrad student at UBC. I had to do these movement analyses and watch people's joint angles and pick up human movements so quickly on film that I got really, really good at this just in everyday life. And then I was able to use it in hockey. So I spent tons of time, probably ruined my eyesight. My eyesight's already bad, probably made it worse. And really learn this skill. And then I've been able to now apply it to hockey. So I hope you're getting a benefit from that. Also from my 10 years of coaching experience, and a good chunk of that was teaching the wrong style of skating. Not wrong, there's no right or wrong, but a less effective style of skating than I could have. And I think the people say experience is usually just like the sum of all your mistakes, which is pretty accurate. And then again, my benefit from playing 25 years at an elite level, and including professionally. But I was really only skating downhill for a year or two, the last couple of years. And it is a big difference, a huge, huge difference. So I'm hoping you're getting kind of benefit of the contrast I had from the downhill skating technique and and the typical skating technique that's taught. So in summary, the idea is that you want to, oh yeah, I think I told you this before, but when you get it right, when you get the inner spring, the bounce, the hips, the ice pressure location, the blade pressure, the tension just right, it literally feels like you're skating downhill, because it's way less effort, and where you're placing your feet and where and how you're twisting your hips causes you to use that lean, and you feel a little out of control at first, because you're going so much faster than you're used to going with so much less effort, which is really similar to skating or biking downhill, right? You go faster with less effort. So that's why it's called the downhill skating system. So I'm hoping you understand the inner spring. Now, I go much more in depth into the inner spring in the members area. This is just kind of an introduction of the idea, the concept. The idea of bounce and how that ties into the stretch shortening cycle, and how that can dramatically enhance your power, especially when it's tied into the inner spring and your hips. And then I'm also hoping you understand the ice pressure location, on where you should be placing pressure on the ice and why to initiate the fall, so that you're able to get speed without tension. And then, yeah, tension. Not having too much tension, so that you can use the elasticity, so you can use the bounce of your muscles, and usually really use the reflexes in your spine, rather than traveling all the way up to your brain and using up that valuable brain power, those valuable resources. So that's the whole thing in a nutshell. Now, if you'd like to take a next step and get a jump start on everyone else, like quite literally, I have created a course called the Downhill Skating System, which is how to skate like Connor McDavid, Barzal, Dahlin, like all these guys skate this way. And it has the full details, including videos of each drill that you would do on and off ice, full explanations. We have the green light indicators, which allows you to have measurable progress. And like, I'm a big believer that there are no shortcuts to success, but there is a straight path there. And that straight path is the shortest distance from where you are right now to where you want to be. So like I said, there's no shortcuts, but there is a smart and fast way to get there. And at Train 2.0, that's our goal, is to make that path straight as possible, as clear as possible, as simple as possible, so that you can get from where you are to where you want to be as quick as possible, the straight path. So if you're interested, I have opening, it's already open actually, the Downhill Skating System, which is how to skate like McDavid, Barzal, Dahlin, Matthews, all these top end guys. These are the mechanics that they use. It is a 4-week course. It includes on and off ice exercises, and I guarantee the results, which might sound strange, but since guaranteeing results in hockey is really hard to do, but I do it anyway. So you can go check that out. And again, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Maybe this presentation was all you needed. So this course isn't for everyone. If you'd rather learn this stuff on yourself, and kind of like, it took me literally probably 25 years to learn it, but it wasn't because I wasn't practicing. It was because I just didn't get hit with the right information at the right time. I got hit with it when I was like 24 instead of when I was much younger. So if you'd rather learn, now I've kind of given you some ideas, you might prefer to learn this yourself rather than have someone show it to you. So this course isn't for you if you'd rather learn it by yourself. And you do have to invest time, money, and energy into this course. It is a big investment in terms of mostly your time and energy. And not everyone is willing to do that. People like to just see the scientific information and kind of let it permeate their brain and then go on. But for those who are interested in investing their time, money, and energy into improving their skating, this is the course for you. Otherwise, this is not the course for you. So I don't want to waste your time, but I thank you for joining me in this presentation. I hope you've learned something. So yeah, the registration is open. And like I said, it's a course that for the first time shows you exactly how to master this brand new technique that you're seeing, and it's guaranteed. And you can learn more by, oh, I don't have a link for it. There should be a link up in the top right corner of your screen. I will put it there like in a second. But if not, you can check the link in the description, or just go to train2.0.com if you'd like to check that out. And if not, thanks again for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope you learned something new. Let me know if you didn't. Let me know if there was something that was unclear that I could explain better. Let me know what explanations worked for you so that I can adjust the presentation and make it better, quicker, faster, clearer, so that you can get the most out of this and take the straight path from where you are to where you want to be. So thanks very much again for watching, and I hope to see you very soon. Bye-bye.